Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to speak with me today. I was very intrigued by something you said at the Berlinale press conference, that when you started writing the script, you personally were closer to Tom's character, not having any children, but then you ended up kind of migrating towards Dave. I was curious, how conscious were you of this process while writing the script?
I wasn't at all conscious about it. I mean, this idea was in my head for a very long time, and back then, it was like 10 years ago or something, when I first visited Fuerteventura, I was intrigued and fascinated by the idea of shooting a film on Fuerteventura, and I had this encounter with the tennis coach. But it wasn't a story at that point, it was just something that started to work on me. And then a couple of years later, I started to write down ideas, and I thought about my connection to the script and the character, and it seemed like I had a few things in common with this Tom character. And then I think it was during lockdown I actually sat down, turned these loose ideas into a screenplay. But in the meantime, I founded a family. I became father for the second time, and I started that I also have a strong connection to the Dave character, and therefore it's a very interesting process, because like it was the story was developing over a certain amount of time, and I related to both characters throughout the whole process.
I mean, coming of age is always tied to younger characters, but do you feel there's an element of that with Tom as well?
Well, yeah, coming of age is about, growing up, I guess. And in this regard, I think it has something in common with coming of age, because he seemed to be a character that refuses to deal with the responsibilities of life. And I think you can look at it as a late coming of age. This is the interesting aspect about Sam as an actor, because he still has this vibe of a young man, right? He has this very athletic body, and he has this charming smile and everything. But also, he's like now in his mid-40s, and we can sense that also time becomes a thing in his life. And I think that was a very interesting aspect about him as an actor for this part, that he's like stuck in between these two chapters of his life. So yeah, he's somebody who's definitely should grow up to a certain degree and make choices, and I think start to listen to what's important and what's missing in his life.
And speaking of Sam Riley, when you were finishing up your script and started looking towards actors, what kind of attributes were you searching for in the actors?
What kind of what?
Attributes?
Yeah.
Characteristics?
Well, I think in the wrong hands, the character could have easily turned into some cliche, but thanks to Sam and his life experience and everything that he gave to the character, I think now it became a very emotionally complex and deep character. Someone who's like not just someone who's a very neglected, lonesome guy on an island, but also somebody who has the desire to reconnect with his emotional life, and realizes that he needs more profound relationships in his life, and more meaning. And I think with the life experience that Sam brought to the character, he turned it into this emotionally complex guy rather than some cliche tennis coach.
How about the British couple? What were you looking for when you met with actors for these parts?
I was looking for somebody who's more like a man-child than a grown-up family father, and there's a certain darkness and edge to the characters that Dave played in previous films that fascinated me and made me curious about him as an actor, because I've seen him in movies like Spencer or The Lost Daughter from Maggie Gyllenhaal, and I became a fan right away. And it was like, I don't know, it was clear from the very beginning when I discovered him that I wanted him to be Dave, and fortunately he agreed to play the part. But it was important to me that he's somebody who's not just a goofy, clumsy family dad, but also somebody who has his own demons, who tries to, get recognized by his wife, wants to be a good father, wants to be a good family man, but fails in doing so to a certain degree. He's more tries to be more like a friend to his son than a father, and I think there's a big misunderstanding. But also he's a warm and loving father, and I think this mix made a very interesting character that Dave brilliantly embraced by playing that part. There's something about Stacey that I thought would be a good match to the end character. She's kind of distant, unreadable, and cool, not in real life, but in the parts that she played, and I thought that would make a good femme fatale, and we have a common friend who introduced us to each other, and we met in London and we talked about the part. And I think, to me, she's the most complex character in the film, because there obviously is a secret in her life that she has to deal with, that gives her trouble, but still she keeps the facade and plays along. But on the other side, there's this irrational, emotional life that makes her go to the island again. It's almost like a return to the crime scene kind of move, where she has to bring her family along because there's no other way to go there without them, and see this tennis coach again, who might be the biological father of her son, which we don't want to spoil here. But I think she's, in that sense, she's very complex emotionally. And the big challenges, I think, for all characters were that they can't verbalize their inner life, their needs, their problems and conflicts. It's all taking place behind the facade of their performances. And I think because I was lucky enough to have a brilliant cast, the one I have, like Sam, Stacey, and Jack, we understand all these inner processes without hearing them, or let the characters talk about them.
Speaking of the mystery and these processes, how are you working on this with the cast? How much of it was about concealment, or was it about even discovering it while shooting it?
Talked quite a lot about the characters before we started to shoot it, before we started to shoot the film. And I was very happy that there weren't so many questions about the characters themselves. I think the script pretty much spoke for itself. We sat down, had a few readings, and talked about a few things, but there wasn't a big mystery about what happened or what couldn't have happened. I think everything the characters and the actors needed to know about the characters were, in one way or the other, already in the script. So I think we had a common understanding of what's going on in the emotional life of the characters.
But is there, for instance, still some mystery when you rewatch the films?
What was interesting for me to witness was how Anne started to behave throughout the film, that she always went against the obvious, and she always behaved in a way that made it hard to read for the other characters what's going on. Why is she behaving weird? Why is she going swimming while the police is searching for Dave? Why she's getting drunk? And why she's suddenly not fulfilling the expectations we have towards a grieving person or a person in trouble. And the way that Stacey explored the Anne character was really fascinating for me.
Your working relationship with your fellow scriptwriter. I was at a screening for Lara, which you spoke about discovering his script, and I think Lara was more of an adaptation, but now you collaborated on this script. So how did that feel different than just adapting his previous script?
I think the big difference is the question of whose story is it really? Adapting usually means somebody wrote something very personal and meaningful for himself, and then you try to access it emotionally, personally, and make it your own, because you have to go out there and talk to the actors, and it has to become yours at one point. And of course, it's different if you come with the first impulse, or it's your story, it's something that you want to express, then it has your DNA from the very first moment. And I think that's the big difference between adapting something which isn't yours and developing a story which comes from somewhere inside you and is your own personal approach to something. When I told Blush about this tennis coach and Forteventura and the story I want to tell there, he got inspired right away, and he's a brilliant writer and had a few amazing ideas about what could happen. And later in the process, we asked Laurie, a friend of ours who lives in London, to also join, because we're not native speakers. Blush and I, we talk in the language that we call European English, which means it's not perfect and it's a bit bumpy. And when it came to the point where we wanted to send the script to British actors, we involved Laurie, who also became a co-writer in the process.
And something that goes hand in hand with the vacation noir that you mentioned previously with this film is the setting of a hotel. I feel that that's something so important, this forced intimacy for a short period of time. I was curious, what were your requisites for finding the perfect hotel to set Islands in?
Well, about the locations, since I went to the island a few times and, visited a few places, hotels, but also nature sites, the moment where I started to write the script, I had all these places in my mind. So I was writing the script with places in mind that I already knew. It wasn't like, okay, I'm making up stuff here and then I go and try to find these places somewhere. It was more like I was hoping to get permission to shoot there because this hotel is a very unique place on the whole island. There's this protected nature park, the dunes, which is like a miniature Sahara, and in the middle of it there's like only this one hotel which sticks out like a fata morgana. If you drive towards it, at some point appears on the horizon and becomes bigger and bigger, and it also feels a little bit like in regards of the story and the character. I always told Sam it's also like his Alcatraz. There are no fences, but it's surrounded by desert and there's no escape from it, no matter how hard you try. So there was so many aspects about this place that were interesting in regards of the story that I was like really hoping to get permission to shoot there. And fortunately, somebody in Madrid who was like in charge at the headquarters of this hotel group gave us permission to shoot there. And same with all the other locations, no matter if the caves or the beaches were all places I had in mind when I was already writing the story.